my amazing children. This is Grandma Carla, and I am back with another chapter of Treasures in the Snow by Patricia St. John. We are in chapter 19, Sunshine Instead of Shadows. Grandmother's cold water bandages were so successful that when Annette woke the next morning, the pain and the swelling in her ankle were almost gone, although it still ached to walk on it. It had snowed in the night, too, and the drifts were so deep that Father had to dig a path to reach the cowshed, so it was not a day to go out. But Annette and Danny and Claus and the 3 kittens, all underfoot in the living room, were just too much of a good thing, and by afternoon, Grandmother suggested they should all go over to the hay barn. So Danny carried his new family across in a basket and made nests for them in the hay and turned somersaults, while Annette lay comfortably on her tummy and with Grandmother's big Bible propped up in front of her, turned the pages. She wanted to find her own special verse about Jesus knocking at the door, which the minister had read, and she wanted to learn it by heart right through. She found it quickly because the pastor had told her that it came in the last book in the Bible. There it was, in Revelation chapter 3, verse 20. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man hear my voice and open the door, I will come into him and will sup with him and he with me. Annette learned it so that she could say it without looking and wondered what the last part meant about having supper. She must remember to ask Grandmother when she next had a proper chance. Then she rested her head on her arms and just lay thinking for a time and watching Danny, who looked very queer doing somersaults because his good leg curled up and his bad leg stuck straight out. She had opened the door to the Lord Jesus, and he had come in and was living in her heart, and it had turned out as Grandmother had said. He had come in with his spirit of forgiveness and love. The hard, angry thoughts had gone away, like shadows before the light, and it had not seemed difficult at all to forgive Lucian. In fact, she had stopped thinking very much about that, because when the Lord Jesus came in, he had begun to show her how selfish and unloving and untruthful she had been herself. What she was really worrying about was whether Lucian would forgive her. She had told him, and he had not seemed cross, but after all that, he had lost his prize, and Annette knew now that there was something more she could do about it. There were the Noah Ark's animals. If she took them to the master and told him all about it, he would see how beautifully Lucian could make things, and he would probably give Lucian another prize, even now, if he knew what had happened. But she was so afraid of what the master would think and what the other children would say that she decided not to do any more about it. And as soon as she decided that, she found that she did not want to think about her new text anymore. It had stopped making her happy, and she began swinging on the beams instead and feeding the cows through the hole on the board until Father came over to milk. Then she went down and sat in the manger and talked to him while he worked. Darkness fell early. The children went in to their evening meal, and then it was Danny's bedtime. There was a disturbance at bedtime because Grandmother wanted the kittens to sleep in the barn, and Danny wanted them to sleep in his bed. In the end, they each gave way a little, and the kittens slept under the bed, but there was a lot of conversation about it, and by the time it was all over, Grandmother felt tired out and sank into her chair with a little sigh. Annette drew her stool up beside her, but no sooner were they comfortably settled than there was a knock at the door, and Annette got up to open it. Lucian stood in the doorway, twisting his hand shyly, and Annette, although she wanted to be nice, felt shy too, and they stood there rather awkwardly waiting for each other to say something. Grandmother looked up, surprised at the silence. "Come in, Lucian," she called. "We are glad to see you. Annette, draw up another stool and sit down, both of you." They sat down obediently, and Lucian, after saying that he had come to see how Annette's foot was, relapsed into silence. Annette, after saying, "Much better, thank you," sat staring at the floor. Grandmother looked at them both very hard over the top of her spectacles. "Annette and Lucian," said Grandmother suddenly, "you must stop this quarrel and behave like sensible children. Lucian, you did a terrible thing, but you did not mean to do it altogether, and you have suffered for it. It's no good crying over spilled milk. Now you must take courage and start again. Annette, learn to forgive and be kind, and stop thinking yourself better than other people." "I don't," said Annette. "You do," replied Grandmother, "or you would not find it so difficult to forgive them." "But I have forgiven him," replied Annette. "Out on the mountain, it wasn't very difficult to forgive because I did something nasty to him as well. And when I told him about it, he said he'd forgive me too. Didn't you, Lucian? So we're as bad as each other." "Yes," replied Lucian simply, "but it wasn't such an awful thing as I did. I can make another horse, but I can't make Danny new legs. And anyhow, everyone says you're good and likes you, and nobody likes me." "But perhaps," replied Annette, "it's because they all know what you did and nobody knows what I did. And do you know, Lucian, this afternoon I was thinking I ought to tell the master, but somehow I don't think I ever dare." They were talking to each other. Grandmother sat listening, but because it was Grandmother, they did not really mind. Now she spoke. "Annette," she said suddenly, "how did you come to feel that you could be forgiving? 2 nights ago you told me you never could." "Well, Grandmother, I opened the door, like you said, and then it all happened just as you said. When I asked Jesus to come in, somehow it didn't seem so difficult." "Yes," said Grandmother, "I knew it would be like that if you would only open the door. When Jesus, with his great love and forgiveness, comes into our hearts, there just isn't room for unkindness and selfishness and unforgiving thoughts. They go like darkness when the sun shines in. But there is something else besides unkindness that the love of Jesus cast out. Give me my Bible, Annette." Grandmother turned the pages slowly, peering at the print until she found the 4th chapter of the first epistle of John and pointed to verses 18 and 19. "Read it, Annette," she said. So Annette read aloud, slowly and distinctly. "There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear has torment. He that feareth is not made perfect in love. We love him because he first loved us." "That's right," said Grandmother. "Perfect love casts out fear. When Jesus brings his perfect love into our hearts, it drives out unkindness and selfishness, and it can also drive out fear. You see, if we really believe that he loves us perfectly, there is nothing left to be afraid of. If he loves us perfectly, he will never let anything really harm us." Annette and Lucian sat thinking for a minute. Then they smiled at each other. Annette got up and went to her own cupboard and brought out her Christmas bear and broke it in half as a peace offering. They sat on their stools, Lucian munching happily, but Annette still thoughtful and troubled. She knew more clearly than ever now what was right, but still she didn't want to do it. Lucian didn't stay very long, and when he was gone, Annette said good night and rose to go to bed. "Annette," said Grandmother, "remember that when Jesus comes in, he only comes in as master. You must do what he tells you to, and not what you want to anymore." "Yes, Grandmother," said Annette sorrowfully. She went upstairs, and when she was undressed, she knelt down to pray. "Lord Jesus," she said, "I do want to do what you say. If I really have got to tell, please make me brave and stop me from being afraid." She got into bed with a lighter heart and soon fell fast asleep. In the morning, she awoke early and lay in the shuttered darkness, wondering what time it was. As she wondered sleepily, she saw a light creeping through a chink in the shutter and falling in a bright patch on the floor. It's morning, thought Annette. I'll open the shutters and see if the sky is beautiful. She jumped out of bed and flung them back, and the light streamed in. The valley still lay in deep shadow, but the sunlight, rising over a gap in the mountains opposite, had crept down as far as their house. The lights glistened on the snow, and it was dazzling, and the peaks behind were so bright that it hurt to look at them. It filled the little room that had been so dark with the sweet, cold freshness of early morning. It's as grandmother said, thought Annette. There's no way of getting the shadows out of the valley except by just waiting till the sun shines on them. Then you couldn't keep them if you tried. Hating Lucian is like shadows, and being afraid of owning up is like shadows, and letting Jesus in is like opening the shutters. She was so pleased with this thought that she got back into bed and lay comfortably thinking about it until it was time to get up. Then, still limping, she dressed and went to the kitchen where grandmother was stirring the coffee. Grandmother, she said firmly, I want to go and see the schoolmaster this morning. But what about your foot? Asked grandmother. I'll go on the sled. I don't know. I suppose I'll go on the sled. But how will you get back? I don't know. I suppose I'll just limp back. But whatever happens, grandmother, I must go and see the schoolmaster this very morning. I can't wait. What's all this about? Chimed in father, who was knocking the snow off his boots in the doorway. If Annette wants to see the master, she can go down with me. I'm taking the cheeses down to the train in the mule cart. I'll drop Annette at the house and pick her up on the way back from the station. Annette's face brightened joyfully. She just couldn't have waited. If she had waited another whole day, she might start feeling terribly afraid again. Sitting beside father in the mule cart with the cheeses bumping about around her and the Noah's Ark animals wrapped carefully in her hanky, she didn't feel quite so happy. She couldn't imagine what she would say to the master. What if he were very, very angry with her? He might be. What do you want to go see the master for? Asked father suddenly. Are you tired of having no lessons to do? Annette leaned her golden head against his coat. No, she replied shyly. It's just something I want to tell him. It's a secret, Papa. She slipped her hand into his as it held the rein, and he, good, wise man that he was, smiled and asked no more questions. He was a very busy man, working hard from early morning until late at night to make his little farm pay enough to keep his children. He did not often have time to talk to them seriously. He left that to grandmother, but he usually knew what they were thinking by watching their faces and listening to their ordinary chatter. In the quiet of the cattle sheds and the forest, as he worked for them, he thought about them and prayed for them. He knew that his little daughter had been miserable, that something had happened to her, and that she had found peace. But he was quite content to know that she was happy without asking why or how. They jogged on in silence until the white house came in sight. In summer, it looked spotless, but against the purity of the snow, it looked dingy and gray. Down you go, said father, and I'll be back for you in about a half an hour. The mule lurched on, and Annette, with her heart beating very fast, walked up the path and stood for a long time without daring to knock. In fact, she might have stood there until it was time to go home again if the master had not seen her out of the window and come and opened the door without her knocking. Come in, said the master genially, taking her into the little room where they had so often sat and done lessons together. He loved his children, and in the holiday time he missed them and liked them to call on him. Annette went straight to the table, and she undid her handkerchief and arranged the little Noah's Ark animals in a row. Lucian made them, she announced firmly. Aren't they good? The master picked them up and examined them with interest. "They are beautifully done," he replied. "They are really exceptionally good for a boy his age. He will soon be able to earn his living. I had no idea he could carve like that. Why did he not enter for the handwork competition?" "He did," answered Annette, still very firmly. "That's what I came to tell you about. He made a little horse, and I smashed it when he wasn't looking because I was so angry about Danny. But I am sorry now, and I wondered if he couldn't have a prize after all, now that you know all about it." The master looked at her thoughtfully. Her cheeks were scarlet, and her eyes fixed on the ground. "But I haven't another prize," said the schoolmaster at last. "There were only two. One was given to Pierre, and one to you." "Then Lucien ought to have the one that was given to Pierre. It was for the best boy, and Lucien's was much better than Pierre's." "Oh, no," replied the master. "We couldn't do that. After all, Pierre won the prize quite fairly. We couldn't take his prize. If you really want him to have a prize, you will have to give him yours. It was your fault that he lost it, wasn't it?" "Yes," said Annette, and she sat in silence a full 3 minutes thinking. Her prize was a beautiful book full of pictures of all the mountains in Switzerland. It lay in her drawer wrapped up in tissue paper and was her most precious possession. Of course, she could easily say no, and she knew the master would never force her to give it. But Grandmother had talked about perfect love. The Lord Jesus, with his perfect love, was living in her heart now, and he wouldn't want her to keep back anything. "All right," said Annette at last. "Good," replied the schoolmaster, and there was a look of triumph in his eyes, because in those 3 minutes he knew that Annette had won a very big battle. "You shall bring it to me when school begins, and I will present it to him in class, and the children shall see his carvings." "Very well," said Annette, and she looked up timidly into his face to see if he thought her very, very wicked, but he smiled down at her, and she went away knowing quite well that the old master loved her just as much as he had before. Back up the hill with the empty mule cart, bumping and jolting over the snow, home again, and Annette climbed the steps and stood on the veranda. And Danny came and stood beside her with his arms full of kittens. Behind her, Grandmother was cooking the dinner, and in front of her, the sun had reached the valley. She gazed down at the glistening roofs and the silver river, felt Danny's warm little hand in hers, and smelled the delicious smell of steaming soup behind her. This morning, the valley was full of shadows, thought Annette, and now it's full of sunshine. And she knew it was like the Lord Jesus coming into her heart and filling her with love and light and courage. And this is Grandma Carla, and I love you.